how much of their experimentation and they're moving to other genres and including other genres and they changed rock music engineering as well. How much of that was George Martin? Was George Martin just doing what they dreamed, or was he saying, no, let's try this?
They would have never, post 1966, they would have never been able to pull off what they were trying to pull off without George Martin. Yeah. And, John Lennon benefited greatly because of both Paul McCartney and George Martin and their kind of level-headedness. John would come up with these crazy songs that were, they would shift keys in the middle, Strawberry Fields Forever and A Day in the Life and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. But with those two guys, working with John, you got these classic, fantastic pieces of work. I mean, A Day in the Life is an incredible song, but without Paul McCartney and George Martin to kind of rein John Lennon in, that was the wonderful combination. So George Martin was, essential to every aspect of their records.
So in the States during that time period, we had the Wrecking Crew, and there really weren't any bands that had that kind of freedom of creation in the studio with a producer that would sit with them and say, hey, let's try this or let's try that. It was like more, the track is here, come in and sing on it, go out on the road and play it live. And then in the 70s, with the singer-songwriter era, we began to have that with Carole King and James Taylor, Jackson Browne, et cetera. So do you think that was a big factor in the Beatles' creativity, that they had those opportunities?
That they had the opportunities to
create in the studio with George Martin and play on their own records?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They, if you look at where they were recording, first of all, it was the most unappealing situation you could think of. The Beatles would put like a little red gel over a light just to give it a little warmth, because it was just so big and kind of bright and stark. It was like a gymnasium in there, over at EMI. But as they progressed, the Beatles were allowed to start working past midnight, and they were allowed to bring food in, and, they became more at home in the studio. In the beginning, they had to bang it out. The first record, Please Please Me, they did 90% of it in one day. They did about 9 or 10 songs on February 11th, 1963, one day. I'm the Walrus took 2 weeks, it's like, so that was a huge difference.
And all that experimental stuff like Sgt. Pepper and the albums before that and the White Album, did they have to answer to the record companies, or were they just such entities on their own that we'll just take whatever you give us, hand us the tape?
They never had to answer to a record company because in England they were signed to Parlophone, right? EMI, that was their major company. And in America, Capitol did their distribution. So what happened with the record company, as we know now, which we didn't really know at the time when we were buying the records in the 60s, they were different records. We were getting different records than the Beatles were really releasing. The Beatles would put out a record called Beatles for Sale, and they would put out with the Beatles. But we got, the Beatles 6, and we got Yesterday and Today, and we got all these records that didn't come out in England.
How was that possible?
I got Meet the Beatles.
Meet the Beatles, right. Meet the Beatles was the first record on Capitol that we got, which they took songs from the second Beatles album, the one that came out the day we lost JFK. If you look at that record, it's the same record. It's like the Beatles' Four Faces, and all the songs are kind of the same, or they took a few from here. And then as they progressed the years, they would just put these American records out that had all songs from different records on them. So when the poor Beatles would come to America, they never knew what they go. This next one's from Beatles 6, 9, Beatles 9. They would make jokes like, we don't know what the hell it is.